Welcome to the channel. If epic sci-fi stories are your thing, you've just found your new home. Subscribe, like, and share the adventure. The flames reached higher than the tallest spires of New Centauri, consuming centuries of human thought in a single afternoon. Commander Vex of the Galactic Empire watched from his command platform as another stack of forbidden books turned to ash, the smoke carrying away the dreams and rebellions of a species that refused to be silenced. "Sir," his aide, Lieutenant Kira, approached with a trembling datapad. "We've discovered another cache, hidden beneath the old mining facility on Sector 7. Vex's mandibles clicked in frustration. It had been 3 years since the Empire issued Decree 97 Alpha, the complete prohibition of human literature throughout the galaxy. 3 years of systematic raids, public burnings, and executions of anyone caught possessing the dangerous texts, yet still, they surfaced like weeds after rain. "How many volumes this time?" Vex asked, his compound eyes reflecting the orange glow of the burning pile. 2,000, sir. Everything from their ancient philosophers to their modern fiction writers. We found works by someone called Tom, another by a writer named Jane, and dozens of others. The commander's exoskeleton shuddered. He remembered the first time he'd encountered human literature during the initial conquest of Earth. A slim volume of poetry left behind in an abandoned school. Against protocol, he'd read it. The words had carved themselves into his consciousness like acid on metal, speaking of love that conquered death, of ordinary beings who chose to stand against impossible odds, of hope that blazed brighter in darkness. That night, for the first time in his military career, Vex had questioned an order. "Sir?" Kira's voice pulled him back to the present. "What are your instructions for the new cache?" "Burn them," Vex said. Automatically, but the words felt like poison in his throat. "All of them." As his aide scurried away, Vex recalled the report that had triggered Decree 97 Alpha. Rebellion had spread through the outer colonies like wildfire, but not through weapons or military tactics. It had spread through stories. Human stories that spoke of freedom, of dignity, of the right to choose one's own destiny. Alien species who had served the Empire for generations suddenly began to question, to resist, to dream of something better. The draconian miners on Kepler Prime had been the first. After reading human tales of workers standing together, they'd organized the largest strike in galactic history. The aquatic Zephyrians followed suit after discovering human legends of the sea, remembering their own oceanic heritage that the Empire had tried to erase. Even the insectoid hive minds began showing unprecedented individuality after exposure to human stories celebrating personal choice and free will. The Empire's response had been swift and merciless. Not just the banning of the books, but the systematic hunting of humans themselves. Most had been relocated to remote prison worlds or forced labor camps. The few who remained free lived in shadows, carrying their stories like sacred flames. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. HFY Chronicle Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you. Vex walked to his private quarters that evening, the weight of his duty pressing down like the gravity of a dead star. In his secure locker, hidden beneath false documents and military protocols, lay a single book. A collection of human stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. He'd told himself he kept it for intelligence purposes, to understand the enemy. But as he opened to a story about a teacher who refused to abandon her students during a war, Vex knew he was lying to himself. He kept it because somewhere in those pages lived something his species had forgotten in their millennia of service to the Empire, the belief that one individual could change everything. Outside his window, the burning continued into the night. But across the galaxy, in hidden caves and secret chambers, In the hearts and minds of countless beings, human stories lived on. They were more than words on pages now. They had become something far more dangerous to an empire. Built on submission and fear, they had become hope itself. Spreading from world to world, species to species, carried by beings who understood that some things were worth any risk to preserve. The underground network called itself the Library. Maya, one of the last free humans in the galaxy, moved through the abandoned subway tunnels beneath the ruins of old Chicago, carrying humanity's literary legacy in a worn backpack. Each book weighed more than its physical mass suggested. They carried the collective soul of her species. "Contact approaching from Tunnel 7, whispered Finn, her partner and the only other human in their cell. His voice crackled through the primitive communicator they'd fashioned from salvaged Empire technology. Alien, single entity, could be a trap. Maya pressed herself against the tunnel wall, feeling the cold metal against her spine. In the 3 years since the Great Burning began, trust had become humanity's rarest commodity. The Empire offered rewards that could feed a family for years in exchange for information about human survivors or their hidden literature. The footsteps grew closer, too heavy for human, with an odd clicking rhythm that suggested either mechanical augmentation or non-terrestrial physiology. Maya's hand moved to the plasma cutter at her belt, though she knew it would be useless against Empire military hardware. A figure emerged from the shadows, and Maya's breath caught in her throat. It was Commander Vex himself, the butcher of the book burnings, his insectoid features unmistakable even in the dim emergency lighting. But something was wrong with the picture. He was alone, without guards or weapons, and his posture suggested fear. "Please," Vex said, his translator rendering his chittering speech into accented standard. "I need to speak with you. So you can drag me to another burning?" Maya kept her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Sorry, but I've seen enough of your work. You don't understand." Vex raised his hands, a gesture that looked awkward on his arthropod frame. "I'm here because of what I've read, because of what your stories have shown me." Finn materialized from another tunnel, plasma rifle trained on the commander. "Maya, step away from him. This has to be a setup." But Maya found herself studying Vex's compound eyes, seeing something there she'd never expected from an Empire officer: doubt, pain, recognition of something terrible within himself. "What stories?" she asked quietly. Vex reached slowly into his military jacket and withdrew a battered book. Maya recognized it immediately, a collection of Earth's greatest ethical philosophers, from ancient wisdom teachers to modern thinkers who'd questioned authority and championed individual dignity. "I've read about your concept of conscience," Vex said, "about the responsibility each being has to refuse participation in evil, regardless of orders or consequences. Your species calls it moral courage, a concept you've been systematically trying to erase," Finn growled. "Yes." Vex's mandibles clicked in. What Maya had learned was a sign of deep distress among his species. "And in doing so, I've become something I no longer recognize. Something that goes against everything I once believed about honor and duty." Maya took a step closer, ignoring Finn's warning gesture. "What do you want from us?" "I want to help preserve what I've been destroying. Your literature doesn't just tell stories, it teaches beings how to be better than they are. The Empire fears that more than any weapon, because Empire is built on oppression can't survive empowered citizens," Maya said, echoing words from one of the banned political treatises. "Exactly." Vex's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I've seen the reports from the outer worlds. Species that had been compliant for centuries are remembering who they were before the Empire conquered them. They're asking questions, forming councils, demanding representation, all because they read human stories about beings who chose freedom over safety." Finn lowered his weapon slightly. "Even if we believed you, which I'm not saying we do, what could you possibly offer us?" Vex pulled out a small data crystal. Locations of 17 book caches we haven't raided yet. Transport schedules for prisoner transfers from 3 human work camps, and something else, the location of the archive. Maya's breath stopped entirely. The archive was legend among human survivors, a rumored repository containing copies of every piece of human literature ever written, supposedly hidden somewhere by resistance fighters before the final fall of Earth's governments. The archive is real? She whispered. Not only real, but intact. Hidden in the one place the Empire would never think to look inside the Imperial Palace itself, in the personal collection of someone who has been secretly preserving human culture for decades. Who? Vex's expression grew complicated. The Emperor's own daughter. Princess Lyra has been collecting and hiding human literature since before the decree. She's been waiting for the right moment to act. The tunnel fell silent except for the distant drip of water and the hum of failing life support systems. Maya felt the weight of possibility and danger in equal measure. Either this was the breakthrough the human resistance had been hoping for, or it was the most elaborate trap the Empire had ever set. "Why should we trust you?" she asked finally. Vex opened the book in his hands to a marked page. "Because yesterday, I read a story about a soldier who chose to disobey orders rather than participate in genocide. And I realized that I don't want my legacy to be measured in the ashes of burned books." Princess Lyra moved through the vast corridors of the Imperial Palace like a ghost haunting her own life. To the servants and guards, she appeared to be taking her usual evening walk through the cultural wing, a pursuit they considered appropriately frivolous for the Emperor's daughter. They couldn't see the datapad hidden in her ceremonial robes, couldn't know that she was documenting every human literary work in her secret collection. The archive, as Commander Vex called it, occupied a space behind a false wall in her private chambers. What had begun as childhood curiosity about the dangerous species her father had conquered had evolved into something approaching obsession. Human stories possessed a quality she'd never encountered in the literature of other species. They celebrated the possibility of change, of growth, of individuals transcending their circumstances. Her own people, the Zerethi, had achieved galactic dominance through rigid hierarchy and absolute obedience. Their literature consisted mainly of military histories and technical manuals. The concept of questioning authority, of individuals making moral choices that conflicted with social expectations, was so foreign to Zerethi culture that they lacked words for it, until she'd read human books. A soft chime indicated someone approaching her quarters. Lyra quickly concealed the datapad and assumed her usual pose of idle nobility, reviewing fabric samples for an upcoming state dinner. The door opened to admit her father, Emperor Thane, his massive form filling the doorway. "Daughter," he said, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded 1,000 worlds. "Walk with me." They moved in silence through the palace gardens, past fountains that recycled water from a dozen conquered worlds and flower beds displaying flora from across the galaxy. Everything beautiful and exotic, collected like trophies. "The human problem persists," Thane said finally. "Despite 3 years of systematic elimination of their literature, rebellion continues to spread. My intelligence services report underground networks sharing stories by memory, alien species learning human languages to better understand the forbidden texts." Lyra kept her expression neutral, though her heart's dual organs that betrayed nothing of her inner turmoil began racing. Perhaps the solution is more thorough elimination of the source. The source? Thane's golden eyes fixed on her with predatory intensity. The humans themselves. Why permit any to survive if their very existence inspires resistance? Her father's approval radiated through his biological field, a Zerethi trait that allowed them to sense the emotional states of their own species. Lyra had learned to project false emotions decades ago, a skill that had probably saved her life. "More than once, I have considered this," Thane admitted. But humans serve useful functions as laborers and researchers. Their creativity, properly channeled, benefits the Empire. It's only their dangerous ideas that must be eliminated. What makes their ideas so dangerous? Lyra asked, genuinely curious about her father's perspective. They're a weak species. Single heart, fragile bodies, short lifespans. Why do their stories carry such power? Thane paused beside a fountain dedicated to the conquest of the Andromedan cluster. Because they believe in transformation. Their literature teaches that any being, regardless of birth or circumstance, can choose to become something greater. Such ideas are poison to order. But surely their stories also contain cautionary tales, works that reinforce proper hierarchy? Some. Yes, but even their stories of failure often celebrate the attempt to resist authority. They glorify martyrdom, sacrifice for abstract principles, the idea that dying for beliefs is preferable to living in compliance. Lyra nodded thoughtfully, while internally her mind raced. Her father understood exactly why human literature was dangerous. It offered hope to the hopeless, dignity to the degraded, the possibility of change to those who had accepted their fate. "I have a proposal," she said carefully. "Allow me to study their literature more thoroughly. Know your enemy, as the military maxims teach. Perhaps understanding the specific mechanisms of their influence will help us develop more effective countermeasures." Thane's biological field shifted to something approaching pride. "Excellent thinking. I'll have my intelligence officers provide you with captured text for analysis." "I would prefer to conduct this research privately," Lyra said. "Too many opinions might cloud objective analysis." "Agreed. But I want regular reports on your findings." After her father departed, Lyra returned to her chambers and activated the hidden entrance to her archive. Thousands of human books lined the walls: poetry, philosophy, fiction, history, science, and works that defied easy classification. She'd read them all, so many times, and each reading revealed new layers of meaning. But tonight, she pulled down a slim volume of stories about resistance movements throughout human history. Tales of individuals who had chosen to oppose overwhelming power, who had sacrificed comfort and safety for the possibility of freedom. One story particularly resonated with her, about a young woman born into privilege who had used her position to shelter refugees from an oppressive regime. The woman had eventually been discovered and executed, but not before saving hundreds of lives and inspiring a movement that eventually toppled the government. Lyra had read this story dozens of times, always wondering if she possessed such courage. Tomorrow she would find out. Commander Vex had sent word through channels she'd established. Years ago, the human resistance was ready to attempt something unprecedented. They were going to steal the archive and broadcast its contents across the galaxy, sending every human story simultaneously to every world in the Empire. The logistics were staggering, the risks enormous, and the chances of success minimal. But as Lyra closed the book and began preparing for what might be her last night of safety, she realized that success wasn't the point. The point was choosing to act according to conscience rather than convenience, to risk everything for the possibility that others might be free. It was the most human thing she'd ever contemplated doing. The plan required perfect timing and impossible luck. Maya crouched in the ventilation system above the Imperial Palace's main communications array, watching through a grate as Zirathi technicians performed their nightly maintenance routines. In 6 hours, when the third moon reached its zenith, simultaneous operations would begin on 47 worlds across the galaxy. Commander Vex had proven invaluable in the 3 weeks since their first meeting. His access to Imperial communications had allowed the Resistance to coordinate on a scale they'd never achieved before. More importantly, his detailed knowledge of palace security systems had made this infiltration possible. "Status report," Finn's voice whispered through her earpiece. transmitted on a frequency the Zirathi rarely monitored. Guards changed 15 minutes ago. Maintenance crew should finish in 20 minutes. Still no sign of Princess Lyra. Maya tried to control her breathing. Everything depended on the princess appearing at the designated time with the archive. Data. Without it, they'd be risking their lives for nothing. A new figure entered the communication center, tall, elegant, moving with the fluid grace characteristic of Zirathi nobility. Princess Lyra wore the robes of a technical advisor, her disguise perfect except for the slight tremor in her hands that spoke of barely controlled fear. Lyra approached the primary communications console and began entering commands with practiced efficiency. The archive data transfer would take exactly 18 minutes, long enough to broadcast the contents to every major world in the Empire, short enough to complete before the next security patrol arrived. Maya watched the princess work, marveling at the transformation. This was no longer the sheltered royal who had spent her life in luxury. This was someone who had chosen to risk everything for the possibility of freedom for beings she'd never met on worlds she'd never visit. The first alarm sounded just as Lyra initiated the final transmission sequence. "Security breach in communications," announced the palace-wide alert system. "All personnel to emergency stations." Maya's blood turned to ice. Someone had betrayed them, or their plan had been compromised. Either way, they had minutes before. The palace guard arrived in overwhelming force. "Lyra, abort!" Maya hissed into her communicator. "Get out of there." "Negative," came the princess's calm reply. "Transmission is at 60%. If I stop now, we lose everything." Through the grate, Maya could see Zirathi guards filling the corridors, their energy weapons casting ominous blue glows in the artificial twilight of palace night cycle. Princess Lyra stood at the console like a statue, her hands steady now. Her entire being focused on the data stream flowing through the galaxy's communication networks. 75%, Lyra reported. "Maya, whatever happens, remember that the stories will survive. That's what matters." The first energy blast shattered the communication center's main door. Palace guards poured in, their weapons trained on the princess. Maya recognized the lead figure, General Kos, the Emperor's personal enforcer, known throughout the galaxy for his ruthless efficiency. "Princess Lyra," Kos said, his voice carrying disappointed authority, "step away from the console." "I'm afraid I can't do that, General. Your father has been informed of your activities. He's ordered me to bring you to him immediately." 87%, Lyra whispered into her communicator. Maya made a decision that went against every survival instinct she'd developed. She kicked out the ventilation grate and dropped into the communication center, plasma cutter in hand. "Nobody move," she shouted. Though she knew her single weapon was useless against a squad of armored guards, the distraction lasted exactly long enough. As the guards turned toward this new threat, Princess Lyra completed the final transmission sequence. Across the galaxy, on worlds from the core systems to the outer rim, every major communications array simultaneously received the complete archive of human literature. "Transmission complete," Lyra announced with quiet satisfaction. General Kos raised his weapon toward Maya, but before he could fire, another voice cut through the chaos. "Stand down, General." Emperor Thane entered the communication center, his massive presence seeming to fill the space despite the room's vast dimensions. His golden eyes fixed first on his daughter, then on Maya, and finally on the displays showing the spreading data cascade across the galactic network. "It's too late to stop it," Thane observed with something approaching admiration. "By morning, every literate being in the Empire will have access to the complete works of human literature." "Father," Lyra began, but Thane raised a hand for silence. "Do you know what you've done?" he asked his daughter. "I've given the galaxy a choice," Lyra replied. "The same choice humans have always championed, the right to think freely. to question authority, to believe that individuals matter. Thane turned to Maya. And you, the last free human. What do you think will happen now? Maya straightened, meeting the Emperor's gaze without flinching. I think you're about to discover something humans have always known, that once beings taste freedom, they'll never willingly give it up again. The Emperor's laugh was like distant thunder. Perhaps you're right. General Koss, release them both. Sir? The general's confusion was palpable. I said release them. And send word throughout the fleet Decree 97 Alpha is hereby rescinded. Human literature is no longer banned. As the palace guards lowered their weapons, Maya felt the weight of 3 years of hiding and running finally lift from her shoulders. But she also understood that this was just the beginning. Across the galaxy, countless beings were about to encounter ideas that could change everything. The real revolution was just starting. 6 months after the Great Transmission, the galaxy had become unrecognizable. Maya stood on the observation deck of humanity's first diplomatic vessel in decades, watching as representatives from 200 species gathered for the inaugural session of the Galactic Council of Free Worlds. The Empire still existed, but it was no longer an empire in any meaningful sense. World after world had declared independence, not through violent revolution, but through something far more powerful, the simple act of refusing to participate in their own oppression. The human stories had taught them that freedom was not granted by authority, but claimed by conscience. Remarkable, isn't it? Princess Lyra joined Maya at the viewport, her former royal robes replaced by the simple gray uniform of a diplomatic translator. She had requested asylum with the human delegation, stating that she could no longer remain on a world where she had once helped perpetuate oppression. Your father took it better than I expected, Maya said. He's a student of history, even if he was on the wrong side of it. He knew that empires built on force eventually fall to ideas. I think in his way, he was almost relieved. Below them, the first session was beginning. The draconian miners who had started it all were there, their representatives speaking passionately about workers' rights and dignity. The aquatic Zephyrians had sent their eldest philosopher poet, who quoted human environmental literature while describing their plans to restore their home oceans. Even delegations from the hive mind species attended, each individual now capable of independent thought while maintaining their collective bonds. But it was Commander Vex's presence that moved Maya most deeply. The former Imperial officer now served as head of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, working to document the Empire's crimes while helping former oppressor species understand their role in perpetuating injustice. The Andromedans are requesting copies of your educational literature, Finn reported, approaching with a datapad full of translation requests. They want to restructure their entire schooling system around human principles of critical thinking and creative problem-solving. Maya shook her head in wonder. A year ago, possessing a single human book was punishable by death. Now they're building entire curricula around our stories. That's the power of ideas whose time has come, Lyra observed. They don't spread because they're forced on people. They spread because they answer questions beings didn't even know they were asking. Through the viewport, Maya could see Vex addressing the assembly. His words, translated into hundreds of languages simultaneously, carried across the gathering. We are here not to seek revenge for past wrongs, but to build something new together. Human literature taught us that every being has the capacity for growth, for change, for becoming better than they were. That includes those of us who were complicit in oppression. The response was thunderous, not just applause, but the various ways different species expressed approval and unity. The harmonic humming of the crystalline entities, the light displays of the energy beings, the rhythmic stomping of the stone folk. There's something I need to tell you, Lyra said quietly to Maya. My father is dying. Maya turned, surprised by both the news and the sadness in Lyra's voice. The physicians say it's natural aging. but I think it's something else. I think he's dying of understanding, of finally comprehending the full weight of what he built and maintained. He asked me to give you this. Lyra handed Maya a small, leather-bound book. Maya recognized it immediately. It was her grandmother's journal, lost when their family was captured during the initial raids on human settlements. He's been carrying it for 3 years, Lyra explained. He said it helped him understand what the Empire was really destroying. Not just books, but the memories and dreams of real people. Maya opened the journal to a familiar passage, written in her grandmother's careful handwriting. Today Maya asked me why humans tell stories about impossible things, dragons, magic, heroes who never give up. I told her that impossible things become possible when enough people believe in them. That's why we keep telling the stories, even when the world seems dark. Especially then. He wants to see you, Lyra continued. To apologize in person. You don't have to go. I'll go. Maya said without hesitation. Not for him, but for her. She touched the journal gently. She always believed that even enemies could become friends if they were willing to listen to each other's stories. As the first day of the Galactic Council concluded, Maya looked out at the diverse gathering of beings who had found common ground in the simple human idea that all individuals possessed inherent dignity and worth. The road ahead would be difficult, building new forms of government, establishing trade relationships between former enemies, healing the wounds of generations of oppression. But for the first time since the Empire's ships had darkened Earth's skies, Maya felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel: hope for the future. In her pocket, her grandmother's journal seemed to pulse with warmth, as if the old woman's words were still alive, still spreading their quiet revolution of the heart. The Empire had banned human literature because it inspired rebellion. They had been absolutely right to fear it, and absolutely wrong to think they could stop it. The stories, as always, had survived. And in surviving, they had set the galaxy free.